This is going live. You're live.
Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. Today we are going to be having a good bit of time talking about files, rasps, rifflers, and floats. There are lots of things that seem very similar, and I want to actually go through a whole bunch of these and talk about different shapes and styles and uses, and what you need and what you don't need, and all of the other things that might come along. So we're going to be having a good bit of time with this. This is one of these topics that I have wanted to talk about for years. And every time I get to this, like, ooh, I need to talk about that, then I think, no, I'm still missing one. And then I get that one, I'm like, okay, let's do it. And then I just think about it, like, no, I'm still missing one. Because it's one of these things, you can never have them all. And so at some point, there's always going to be something where I'm talking through a subject and someone says, what about this one? I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I don't have that one here to show you. So I'm going to be going through this as much as we can, but we should be able to cover most of it here. Now, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw those in the live chat. If you are watching this and it is not live, then go ahead and look down in the description below. There's a little arrow down there where you can open up the description. And in there, you will see all of the questions that have been asked with a timestamp beside them. That timestamp will get you fairly close to where it is in the actual video. And so you can actually jump straight to that question. So I hope that helps you out. As to things coming up in the shop, actually, I don't think we have anything coming up right now, do we? We don't have any meets or...
No, I don't
think there's an MWTCA meet I'm going to until February. So yeah, things are pretty quiet here. We're having fun in the shop right now. Yeah, anything I do before I get into this?
That's a dangerous question.
Well, first, let me... What's that?
Nothing.
I put one question over that was asked earlier. I don't know if you saw it.
What, have you tried the razor rasps, like the Iwasaki files?
Yes.
Flowers?
Those, well, yeah, the Iwasaki files, they're basically a... What? Oh, you heard my stomach?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, I have used those. No, I do not have any of them here. They're basically taking a rasp profile and they're wrapping a file cut around it. So it's kind of halfway between the two. And some people really like them and some people really don't. Personally, I think that they are honestly a bit gimmicky. They don't. They cut a little bit smoother, but they don't cut as quickly. So yeah, 6 of one, half dozen another. Some people really like them, some people don't. But we'll be getting to those here in a little bit, or at least talking around those. So first, I want to show off what is basically the big difference between rasps, files, and rifflers. So rasps have these points. Let me make sure I'm actually in focus. There we go. Rasps have points like this. So they basically come in here and they'll take a punch and they'll push each one of these teeth and create the tooth on it. A file has lines going across the surface here. So sometimes they will have lines going across one way and lines going across the other way, and sometimes they'll just have them going one way. Sometimes they go straight across and sometimes they go across an angle. But that's a file, and that's really one of the big differences between a file and a rasp. And then you have floats. Floats are basically a file. So a float is a file. Not all files are floats. Floats are ones where the lines are very, very distinct and they go straight across. They're usually much larger in scope than a file. And often, like in this one, they're rounded. Let me see if I have one that is flat across. Where do you go? Here it is. This is a Planemaker's float where all the teeth are flat across. Another thing with floats is that they tend to be softer. Metalworking files are incredibly hard. They're intended to cut metal, whereas a float is often a little bit softer so you can sharpen it. They're intended to be used with wood. Oh, I didn't grab the Nicholson float. You grab this. Now this is a file holder, a Nicholson file holder or float. In this case, I have a float in here. And these were they were initially used for woodworking, but then along came automotive, and these became all the rage in automotive bodywork. And you'll see them a lot of times being sold as body files. And what they would used to do is they would fill in bodywork with lead, And this would be great for smoothing over top of it. So a float is very good for that. Let's see. Oh, and rifflers. That was the other thing in here. Rifflers, I got a deal a while ago where a guy came across a huge collection of rifflers, and he sold me over 200 of them. Do you need all of these? No. But I want to show you what a riffler is. A riffler is basically a really little file or rasp. Like in this case, this riffler has a rasp tooth, so there's a whole bunch of tiny little teeth cut into it. Whereas the next one over, this one here, this one has a file cut. So the riffler is more the shape of it. Usually it's two-ended. There's one piece on this end and one piece on this end. And they come in all different shapes and sizes and frames. And here, let me just show you through some of my collection. And there is absolutely no need for a collection like this. But mine have some of them that are like a knife blade, some of them that are rounded, some of them are pointed, some of them are square. Like these ones that almost have like a fishtail on the end, and they continue on. And this is just one of my 2 tool rolls of all of my rifflers. Like these ones are square, and then I get into the rounded ones and the triangular ones, and these ones are actually really kind of cool for getting to places. I'll be talking about what these are for, or even these ones that are just round on the ends. We'll be talking about these in a little bit as we start talking about what they're for. I just want to talk more or less about, where did my clicker go? There it is. What are the main differences? Any questions about files so far before I'm jumping in more?
Hang on, I clicked something.
Sorry, do I need to come fix something?
I'm
Okay.
maybe, and hang.
I'm waiting.
Well, I hope you answered Candu's question. He said, would like to hear more detail on floats. I hope that was enough.
Yep, we'll be talking about that in a minute.
All right. Volinar's Workshop asked, have you ever tried sharpening a rasp with something like a Dremel grinding wheel?
I'll be talking about sharpening a bit too.
Okay. What was the other one you asked me about?
I was just wondering if there were any questions pertaining right now.
I don't know. I've had 2 about sharpening and...
Cool. Yeah, we'll be talking about sharpening here in a little bit. So the next question then comes about what do they get used for? And some people are very particular that rasps are for wood and files are for metal. And you should never use a metal file on a wood job, and you should never use a rasp on a metal job. And that's really not true. Anything that is designed to work with metal can work in wood. Wood is much softer than metal, and it's really not going to harm the file. Now, if you take a woodworking rasp or file and you try to put it on wood, you may run into a problem because they might not be hardened quite to the same degree that a metalworking file is hardened, and so you may end up ruining your woodworking. May end up ruining your woodworking rasp or file because you're taking across something that's too hard. That is most common with floats, particularly plane makers floats. Because they tend to be a little soft. If I took this onto metal, I could very easily just ruin all the teeth, and it would just be a hunk of junk. So for a woodworker, I have a whole bunch of files and rasps, and most of these I have collected over the years when I go to an antique sale, or I go to an estate sale, or I go just about anywhere that has hand tools. You'll find like this bucket or box that's full of rasps and files. And they've all slide together and they all rub together, and you think, well, they're a whole bunch of junk. But usually the box is like, $10-15 and you get a dozen files. And I've bought probably a dozen of those boxes or buckets that are just loaded with files. And I bring them back and I'll look through them and I'll pull out 4 or 5, and then the rest I'll either throw away or recycle or use for other things such as a dowel plate. And so I have, most of mine are just old files. None of them are really high quality files. I have some nice Nicholsons. I have some that are a little bit better, but because they were all in a box and rummaging them together, none of them are really great. But they still work fine. I haven't spent a lot of money on them. I have purchased a few specific ones that are really for a specific job and I need something that's sharp. But you don't really need those. The next question that people come to is, should I go to the big box store and grab one with a plastic handle and just get one of those sets of files and rasps? And you can. The problem with them is that they are machine made or they're just not going to stand up quite as long as you would expect. But they'll work, and they're dirt cheap. And most of the time, by the time these wear out, you throw them away, you get another set. And you can probably get them for far cheaper than buying a nice new set of Bako or Nicholson or something of that nature. So most of the time I tell people, if you don't have a lot of money to spend, go to the big box store, grab some files and rasps, and you will learn that they're okay. But once you get some money, you're probably going to want to get something better, or go and get that big bucket of old antiques that you can pick through and find the ones that you really like. So let's actually look at using them and how I'm most commonly using rasps and files in the shops. Any question on setting this up? Just about
a lot
anything
of them
right
are dealing with cleanup, but maybe this one's a quick one. Mr. Q asks, so the file on our right, your left with the red handle. What's so different about that one?
This is a Shinto rasp.
Are they better or worse?
What's that?
He wants to know if it's better or worse.
Shinto rasp, well, let's go ahead and do this. A Shinto rasp is, most people think of them as Japanese, and that's where you commonly find them. And they kind of look like, let me change this over, they kind of look like, hacksaw blades that have been bent and zigzagged. And often you'll have one with a rough side and then a finer side. And these work incredibly fast. I find them to actually be a little too fast for most things. Even with the fine side, they're just not quite what I'm looking for. Now, they do leave it with a decent surface, and a lot of people really, really like them. I'm just not one of those. I just find them to be a bit more work than they need to be. Especially like in here, I'm actually going across the end grain, and they just don't leave the surface quite as nice as I would with just a regular file. With just a standard file, I can do the exact same thing, and I'm going to get a lot cleaner surface. So if I have an area here where I have a straight surface or a convex surface, and I need to take off a lot of material and I don't worry about the finish, that's when I'm going to pull out one of the Shinto rasps and I'm going to go to town and really hog off a lot of material. They tend to leave a nicer surface than a heavy rasp, but a heavy rasp will take off wood even faster. So a lot of times I'm going to come in with a really heavy rasp, and then I'll grab this as kind of the medium and get roughly close to it. And then I'm going to come in with a fairly heavy file, and this will bring me right down to my shape and get me to what I'm looking for. And then I'm going to come in with a really fine file, and I can get it finish ready right off of one of these files, especially this one, which is an incredibly fine file. With this one, I can get the surface to almost shine. You can hear the difference. But one of the big problems with these is you can't get the concave surface. It's just you can't get inside the curve there. And so that's where I've got, where'd it go? Whoop. I've got these. And most of the time, your cabinet maker's rasps, which this is a cabinet maker's rasp, or it tries to be a cabinet maker's rasp, it's been huge, is they tend to come to a point here. And I don't have any real good cabinet maker's rasps. They're rounded on one side and flat on the other. And one of the great things about being rounded on one side and flat on the other is with one shape, I can do the whole thing. I can use the flat side here, and I can do my flat areas, or I can do my convex areas, or I can bring it up in here, and I can do my inside curves, my concave zones. Now you also notice that I'm holding it at the tip and I'm holding it at the handle. A rasp or a file is a two-handed item. And a lot of times I'm actually going to pinch it at either end. I don't like hold the handle. I'll pinch it in here. And then I'm going to start from the tip. I'm going to work my way all the way through the file. And as I do it, I'm not just moving along one line. I'm actually doing a compound surface here. So I'm going to be moving the file across this way. So I'm going at 90 degrees. So with one movement, I can go all the way around. And I can get a really nice, clean, smooth, rounded surface as long as I rotate my body and work the file from end to end. I'll also sometimes, rather than just going straight across the wood, I'll draw a file and I'll go across the wood and down the wood, so up and down as well as across the wood. So I'll start up here, and when I get to the bottom, I'll be down at the bottom of the work. Oops, sorry, you can't see that. So I'll start up here. By the time I'm done, I'll be down here. And these are just methods that allow you to smooth out a surface. Because if I'm just working in one area and just going across in this one area, I'm going to wear down that spot and I'm going to get a low spot there. And then I have to come down farther and try and make those two spots match. And making those two wear spots match is very, very difficult. Whereas if I just stay in one spot, or if I just stay up here and then run it all the way down, and in one motion take it all the way down that side, I'll get a nice clean transition all the way across without any ridges. So that's the main use. And you'll notice that most of mine have a handle. Not all of them do, because I don't have handles for all of them. And this really, really scares a lot of people to not have a handle on a file. And yeah, if that scares you, then don't do it. Most of the time, it just doesn't bother me because I don't generally handle the handle. I'm going to be holding the file here. I'm not going to be holding the file this way. You'll see some people try and do that. If something catches, it's just going to puncture into your hand. Not happy. So I'll hold it out here so that the tip is sticking out this way. If something catches, it just slides through. But a lot of the old timers who were taught the right way to do it will scream and yell at you for not having a handle. But it's still a good idea to have one. What questions we got before I switch over?
Let's see. I half paying attention because
we'll be getting to sharpening here in a moment.
Okay,
for any of those.
hang on. Will you also be talking about rust?
Yes, rust and restoration and maintenance.
Okay. So I'm gonna go with this question. These are not going in order tonight because I'm trying to, what's the word? Combine like questions.
Follow craziness.
Let's see. Woodwork Learner, is a Stanley surform a float or not part of the family?
I don't know a Stanley surform.
Is it surform?
I would have to look at the picture. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of types and names and brands and styles, and everyone does some slight change to one particular style, and they rebrand it, and everyone thinks it's amazing. And there's so many gray areas from one end to the other. So looking at any particular name, I'm not going to be able to help you out there. Sorry. One particular type I'm not going to be talking about are razor files. They're actually the files that have micro razors on them, and they're often, sometimes you'll hear them called planing files, because they actually have a hole in the back, and it allows the chip of wood that carves out to eject out the back. I don't have any of those here. I don't have a whole lot of use with them, but that is another type that's a little bit different.
Really?
What?
Nothing.
So one of the things you're going to hear me saying is that you're going from really coarse with a very, very high grit. It takes off a lot of material and you're getting it down close. And then you're going to move...
Kamikaze duck. You caught it, darn it. They want me to throw something at you.
Kamikaze duck.
Kamikaze duck.
I saw you and I was like, she's going to do something here.
I was trying to be sly, but you were looking at me too much. Well, I didn't want to hit the camera.
Yeah, there's a lot of electronics and cables between me and you.
That would make the live less happy. I mean, I have a fair good aim, but that's a lot of expensive. We won't talk about your aim.
So what you're going to hear me saying is a lot of going from a coarse, rough rasp, and then you go to a more medium one, and a slightly lighter one, slightly lighter one, until you get to this final tiny rasp with little tiny teeth. A lot like using sandpaper. And you're going to go through them and get your surface down to it. And so what you're generally looking for is a set of rasps and files from coarse to fine, 4 or 5 with that dual side, one rounded, one flat, and you can do pretty well. Another one that you'll often come across is a 4 in the hand, or there's all sorts of different names for these. And it is a very, very useful file. And with one of these, you can do quite a bit. And usually they're rounded on one side and flat on the other one. This one doesn't have a whole lot of rounding on it. I have a couple others that have a good bit more. And one of the nice things about this is I can very quickly go from working on the rounded side, flip it around, and now I'm working on the flat side. Or I can do my coarse work, and then I flip it around this way, and I'm doing a more moderate work. And so this can do a lot of work for you, and it's actually relatively comfortable to use. I'm just holding onto it the exact same way you would with any of the other ones. So a 4 in the hand would be a great thing to have. And this one is, yeah, this one's an off-brand.
Did you just say a 4 in the hand?
4 in hand, yeah.
So that wouldn't be 2 in the bush.
Yes.
Hey, I gotta get the mom jokes in. I knew you would like that one.
So just getting a good collection of, 4 or 5 in varying degrees with a rounded side on one side and flat on the other. Those will be most of what you work in. That's why most cabinet makers' rasps are rounded on one side and flat on the other, because that is what you're going to be using most of the time for shaping handles and things like that. And that's usually where I'm using files the most, are on these compound rounded curves on handles and totes and knobs and anything your hand normally comes in contact. A file is a great fast tool for making those shapes. They also come in all different other shapes and sizes. If they are round, they're commonly referred to as a rat tail. And I use these anytime I have an interior void, a hole going through something. There we go. So rather than just being concave on one side, it's concave all the way around.
I like that better than a whole interior void. I have an interior void in the pumper of my body.
There's a reason I married you. I don't know what it is, but I knew there's a reason. So, one of the problems is that people think, well, I'm doing a radius here, which is much bigger than my radius here, and so just like before, when I was draw filing down here, I can do the same thing up here. I can start up here, and then round across, and I can do a larger radius with a smaller rasp or file. As long as I rotate as I slide, I can bring it down and get that really nice flow from one side to the other. Files and rasps will all then come in other sizes and shapes, and like this one's your square. This shape is a mill file. It is probably your most common. It's flat. It has the filing work on both of the edges. Every now and then you'll come across a file that doesn't have filing on the edge. It's smooth on there, and that's considered a safe file. So if you're working on something and you're working up against a 90-degree corner, flattening down the base of it, you're safe because your edge isn't then cutting into the corner that you're working on. But they aren't very common. One button, over to this one. There we go. So files and rasps, that's what most of them are for, or for shaping out your handles, your knobs, your totes. But anytime you're working on a flat surface, most of the time you're going to be grabbing your card scraper, your plane, your spoke shave, something of that nature tends to do a little bit more. But if you're working on the inside of a plane body, or anytime you're working on a flat surface inside of something, you really can't get a card scraper down there. There's no way you're going to get a plane down in there or a spoke shave. How do you work inside of a surface? And you can get it pretty close with the chisel, but chisels always leave these ridges and edges in there, and you want to actually smooth it out and file this out. So in a plane maker's tradition, they used a lot of floats. And this is a plane maker's float, a crank-handled plane maker's float. And that way I can get up to a surface and keep my hand out of the way. Is that someone super Chad?
It is.
Oh, Tiller, you just came back from a cruise.
Yes. And
jealous, man.
He says, we have a frost warning, so I know you all need cocoa. Because apparently Alan is not to be seen tonight. But Tiller asked a question earlier, and it's not super related, but it now moves it to the top of the list. He wants to know if you're coming to the peach meet.
I really, really want to come to the peach meet. It's possibly on my list, but I probably won't know until about a month or so before. It's an expensive meet for me to go to fly out there, and if I buy anything, it's even more expensive because I have to ship it back. But we'll see. I might.
Are you ready for my mom joke?
I'm ready for your mom joke.
You know Orion's belt? It's a waste of space. I know. Not a great joke. 3 stars. I liked that one.
That one is a good one. So let's get back to floats. What floats do is they're not very good at taking off material. So if I use this on this flat surface here, it's really not going to take off any material because it has all of these ridges that have all the pressure evenly spaced out along all of them. So when I push this down into there, it has so many ridges contacting the surface, it's not going to bite in and cut. But if I just chiseled out this surface on the inside and I have chisel edges, chisel marks, that's when I can grab a plane maker's float and I can run down along there, and with this in there, it is going to catch anything that's sticking up, any of those ridges from the chisel work. A float is great at flattening out a surface, not great at taking material off an already flat surface. But if you have a surface that has a little bit of undulation in it, it has some grooves and lines, a float is a fantastic thing for that. And that is one of the places where this came out. In woodworking, I use this a lot for cheeks of tenons and things like that. Anywhere there's been some chisel work and I want to flatten it out a little bit, I could bring in a shoulder plane and work on them there, but I find this actually works a little bit better because it catches any of the ridges left from the saw and will smooth out the work very easily without taking off any thickness that the plane would. And when you're working on the body of a car, if you're working into some Bondo or things like that, that's where this really comes in handy. If you have any ridges on the surface, this will smooth them out without biting into the surface and taking off more material. So having a float is a fantastic use for that. But floats come in a lot of different sizes when you start talking about plane making. This is the only Lie-Nielsen tool that I own. Lie-Nielsen's just a bit too expensive for me, but this is an 1/8 inch float. So it's just like this float, except for rather than being 1 1/8 wide, it's 1/8 of an inch wide. So all the teeth are along here. And if you look at it from the side, let me see if I can do this for you.
I was going to say, it's kind of, whoa.
Make it really blurry. Nope, back up farther. Nope, back up farther. It's not liking me. Close.
It's better. There you go, up.
There. So what we have here is, if you look at it from the side, it looks just like a saw. And in all honesty, that is what a float is. It's just a really wide saw. And one of the interesting things is you can actually get floats in a rip tooth pattern as well as in a cross-cut pattern. So you actually sharpen this just like you would a cross-cut saw. And this is really good anytime you're in a cross-grain situation. The float may catch on the fibers, whereas with this, you can actually sever the fibers just like you would with a saw. So in all actuality, this is a 1/4 inch wide saw. And this particular one I love. It is a very, very old float. And this one has a lot of history for me. One of the fans here on the channel actually purchased this one for me several years ago. And I love it. Any chance I can get to use this, it's one of my favorites. It's one of the fun things about hand tools is there's so much history in them, and every time I pick up one, every tool I own has some history to it. Like this one I picked up from a gentleman who he was selling his house and everything in it, and he was out in the garage a little bit sad because everything in the house was being sold and he was going off to a retirement home. And he was out there and cleaning up something, and I was looking at some of the tools. And the two of us struck up a conversation about the tools and the history behind them. And he had a bucket of files, and this is one in there. And I think, no, it's not here. I have a block plane that I got from him too. And it was kind of interesting to have the history. And so now every time I use one of these, I think about that guy, and I think about the history that he had and the things that it's made in the past. And I'm having a lot of fun with that. So I'm sorry, side topic. We got that. Ooh. Oh, and here's one other interesting one. Anytime you get the bucket of files and floats, you're also going to come across one of these. And this, I have a cousin-in-law, Sarah's cousin-in-law, shoes horses. And so you often see these. What's that?
Talking about Nate?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's my cousin.
He's
but anyway,
your cousin?
That's just sticking out.
I thought Beth was your cousin. And he was
Nate's the cousin.
Nate's the cousin? Oh, okay, never mind. Family relations. This is actually for horses' hooves. So just like wood or steel, you get the exact same thing. On this one, you have a rasp on one side, You file on the other, and you use this to rough out the hoof and get it close to shape, and then you do this for your final smoothing and get it right down to what you want, so you have a nice mating surface for your horseshoe to go on. So you'll often come across big monsters like these, but these are really good for pounding down and turning into dowel plates. So yeah, I wanted to show you that because I have one from Nate that he gave me, and I was going to turn this one into a dowel plate, but then turned another one into that instead. I'm going to be talking about rifflers in a minute, but the next thing we need to talk about is cleaning, maintenance, and sharpening. Any questions particularly before I jump into that?
There's lots about cleaning, maintenance, and
Okay, let's get into cleaning, maintenance, and sharpening. If I don't answer those, then those questions will come into handy. The most common thing you're going to find is they get clogged up. The wood just fills up the fibers and they don't work quite as well. So what you can grab is a file card. Not a card file, that's a place where you store your cards. But this is actually it's a tiny wire brush. I picked this one up at one of the woodworking stores in Madison. Osborne. I think I have linked one of these on my website. But one of the nice thing about this, the wire bristles are softer than the steel, but they can come in here and very quickly, let me get this on a surface where it's going to actually catch, they can clean out all the dross in the file itself. I'll grab another one here like this one. I normally put them into a dog hole, but I'm trying to show you guys. Very quickly, I just keep that on my bench, and that little bit of cleaning there not only cleans them out and allows them to work much faster so they're not all clogged up, but number two, anytime you leave all that wood inside there, you're actually causing a place where water and moisture can live, because that wood will absorb the moisture and hold it close to the steel. So when you're done with the tool, you want to make sure you get all of the wood out of it so that you're not going to be rusting the surface. Now, I don't have a huge amount of problem with rust down here because I'm in an air-conditioned basement. But if you are out in the open, particularly your hardened files rust almost instantly. Any hardened steel rusts much quicker than regular mild steel. And so you're going to want to keep these oiled. I actually have one friend who has a bucket of motor oil, and when he's done with his files, he'll dip them in the bucket and wipe them off and then put them up to let them drip dry, and that's how he keeps the rust off his files. I know that may be a little bit more extra than it needs. Most of the time, like once every 6 months or so, I'm going to go through my shop and oil all my tools. I have an entire video on rust maintenance where I talk about how I do that. But I have a rag and oil, and I just wipe them down quickly, let the oil absorb in, and then they're good to go. If I were outdoors, if I were keeping them in a garage or a non-air conditioned place, or if I lived down south where there's wild humidity changes, then I would be much more regimented in keeping them oiled. That's probably the best way you can keep the rust off of them, is keep them oiled. Have a regular set time that you go through your shop every so often and you oil everything. Wax it down and protect your surfaces. I know some people who are in really, really bad places, and every time they use it, before putting it back in the rack, they're going to oil it and make sure that it's prepared and ready to go. So oil really is the best way to protect them against rust, but hardened steel is, once it rusts, it goes pretty quickly. To get the rust off of them, there are all sorts of different ways. I know a lot of people love electrolysis. I personally love WD-40 Specialist. Not regular WD-40. They make WD-40 Specialist Rust Remover. You can buy it in a 1 gallon jug. It is cheaper than Evaporust and works just as well as Evaporust. And you can get it in all of the big box stores. Evaporust works really well, but it is far more expensive and harder to find. So that's another one. I don't use vinegar as much on my files because you have to watch vinegar, because if you let it sit too long, it eats through the rust and then starts eating into the steel. So you want something that is a little bit more mild and just works on the rust. Were you saying something?
Oh, it looked like you had a strange animal in the corner, and I figured out it's your Bob Ross wig.
Oh,
It looked like eyes. I was like, what? I was slightly
I'm
distracted.
keeping a Bob Ross.
So I just had a question that relates to this
Okay.
prop up. And cbryantbear wants to know any particular oils?
I generally use 3-in-1 oil. You're going to want to use a light tool oil. But in all honesty, the type of oil really doesn't matter that much. A light tool oil just flows easier, especially for a file. If you're wiping it on, a light tool oil will work down into the crevices in the file a little bit faster, whereas a thicker oil may not seep all the way down. But in all honesty, any oil will work just fine. But I like to use 3-in-1. It's what I have in all my oil cans, and it's around. Yeah, so that's the big thing. Get the wood out of your file before storing it, and then keep them oiled, and they generally stay rust-free unless you're in a really bad area, in which case then you're going to have to employ a bunch of other things. Now the question comes on to sharpening files. Now if you have a float, particularly a plane maker's float or a woodworker's float, the steel is soft enough you can sharpen them just like you sharpen a saw. So I can grab, let me pull out these. I can grab a regular saw filing file, which is a triangular file, and I can cut the teeth. So just like I would before, I can literally file in the shape of the tooth all the way across this, just like I'd sharpen a saw. And with the cross-cut pattern, it's the exact same thing. I'm just going at an angle with a bit of a fleam in it. Half of them this way, half of them this way. If I'm doing a wide float, like one of these, if they're straight across, I can do the same thing on here. It just takes a little bit longer. I have to set in there, and I go straight across, and I can file the tooth back in. These are designed to be sharpened. They are softer than your regular files, so they will work just as well as a saw plate would. Now, I've had a bunch of people coming up with all sorts of ideas on how to sharpen these that are actually the rounded floats. In all honesty, most of these are actually hardened, and so I don't know if there is a good way to sharpen them, but I've heard all sorts of different ideas of how exactly you would set up a circular cutting file. But these are so common, and I buy another bucket with another dozen of them. I don't worry about sharpening those. But some of the floats, they're much harder to find, and so spending the time to sharpen them is well worth it. You'll hear a lot of people talking about acid sharpening, actually soaking them in a series of acids, and in all honesty, that is not sharpening. That is cleaning, but it is not sharpening. Basically, if you imagine every tooth on a file or a rasp comes to a sharp point, and over time that point dulls, and you get this rounded blob on the end. Well, you sharpen it, and you basically then take the material off on other sides and leave a new sharpened point. But with most files, they're so hard that there is no way to actually sharpen them. You're just going to end up ruining the file you run across it. Well, when you soak them in an acid, it eats away at the steel. If you have that rounded tooth as opposed to it being sharp, you're going to remove an even amount of material all the way around the tooth. So the tooth ends up being smaller, but it doesn't end up being any sharper. And you will see people who will swear on it. And honestly, I've seen files that people said, look, I sharpened this with acid, and I tried. It's like, it's not sharpened. Go and try a new file, and that's what sharp feels like. Every file out there will dull over time, and once they get to a certain dullness, you send them off to the blacksmith to be remade, or you turn them into a dowel plate, or you have something else with it. There really is no way to sharpen a hardened file. But don't tell that to someone who believes in acid sharpening. They will swear by it up one side and down the other. Yeah. Don't get me started on that topic. Sharpening, cleaning. I didn't talk about hand-stitched rasps. What you're going to find is I actually do not have a hand-stitched rasp. That's one of the things that I really want to get. I want to get a set of good Shinto rasps. I want to get a good set of hand-stitched cabinet rasps because this one is machine-stitched. Let me show you. Oh, that didn't work. Go on to this one. There we go. This one is machine-stitched, and you'll see all of the stitchings are in perfect lines around the surface here. And what happens is if I go straight across a surface on those lines, eventually they start to get in a rhythm and the whole thing bounces across the wood.
How'd that go again?
Bounces across the wood. And that can get very, very annoying. It also gives you ridges in the wood. And the way you fix that is you don't go straight across the wood at any time. You go on a diagonal, or you skew it up. Or you'll cut this way, and then you'll move a little bit, and you'll cut this way, and you'll move a little bit, and you cut this way, and you move a little bit, and you cut this way. And having that rotating cut pattern stops those ridges from forming. But what you can get is a hand-stitched file, a hand-stitched rasp, and the person who actually does it will put the stitches in by hand, and they're in random locations all throughout, so you don't get these lines across. And what's nice about that is there is no even line. And when you go across, actually I gotta go this way because the grain's going that direction. When you go across, you will get a really nice smooth feel, and a hand-stitched rasp feels great in the hand. It is incredible the difference between a hand-stitched rasp and a good machine-stitched rasp. The problem is a machine-stitched rasp, a good machine-stitched rasp will cost you $10. Maybe 20 for a really, really high-end one. Whereas a hand-stitched rasp may cost $60, $70, $80, $100 for one rasp. So you have to ask yourself, is that vibration worth the extra money? And for a lot of people, yes, having that really comfortable lack of vibration is well worth getting a hand-stitched rasp. And they do feel really, really good. But if you don't have the money, then machine stitched is fine. Now there is a company out there, it's going to bug me, and they've started making a machine stitch rasp where they're randomly punched teeth. And one of the nice things about that is with a hand stitch rasp, you can get really close to making every tooth the exact same height. But it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that. And even with someone with a lot of skill, there's going to be ever so slight differences. You'll have some teeth that stick up a little bit farther than others. With a machine stitch rasp, every tooth is exactly the same because the machine has been punching them exactly the same the entire time. And so if you can get a machine stitch rasp that has a random pattern toothing, that's like the best of both worlds. And I want to get a set of those, and it's bugging me right now. I can't remember the company's name. Someone will post it in here. But those are kind of cool. They're a little bit more expensive. If I remember correctly, they were like $35 a rasp. So they're halfway in between the two, but you kind of get the best of both worlds in the quality of them. So what questions have been asked that I have not answered?
Okay, now I'm just going to read them in order,
cool.
And you're going to tell me yes or no.
Yep.
So Candu said would like to hear more detail about floats. I'm assuming we got enough about that. Volinar's workshop had asked about sharpening with like a Dremel grinding wheel.
Ah, yes, in rasp. Not really, because the tooth of a rasp isn't like the tooth of a file has been cut into it. So there is a saw, there's a tool that came across and cut this tooth into the file. With a rasp, it's not cut in. It's literally taking a punch and punching the steel, and it lifts this little tooth up. Let me see if I can focus in on this and show you that. Something like, no, I'm not going to be able to focus in on this, am I? Ooh, yeah, there we go. So if you look at this really closely, grab this to point it out, is you'll see in here, there's actually missing material here behind the tooth. And so a punch literally came in here and came in here. Oh, here I am looking at the wrong thing. Sorry about that.
There we go.
So you can see how there's actually a missing bit of material back here, and a punch literally came in and scooped that tooth out of the material. And so rather than cutting this in, that tooth was originally laying out flat on the surface and has been pushed up in. So theoretically, if you wanted to come in here with a Dremel or file and try and get underneath each and every one of these teeth, you possibly could, but holy cow, that would be a lot of work. Number one, it'd be a lot of work, and number two, it would be very, very difficult to get all the teeth to the exact same height. So generally I'm going to say no, it isn't worth that, because doing that would probably cost 2, maybe 3 hours to sharpen this, whereas I could go out and buy this exact same file for 20, 30 bucks. So yeah, my time's not worth that. But I mean, if you want to try it, give it a work. That'd be interesting to find out. Sorry, what's next?
Let's see. Luke K had asked, what's the best thing to do with a dull file?
I like throwing them away. Generally, I'll throw them in the recycling can for the steel. But if you need a dowel plate, you can actually make a dowel plate. I have a video on doing this, where you can take a file, and if you have a forge, pound it down and flatten it out. But you then anneal it, drill your holes, and then harden it, and you can then drive pins through these to create your dowels. So a dowel plate is a great thing to have with this, because you need a very hard steel for that. Or a hard steel is a good thing, isn't necessary, but it's what a lot of people do with old files. Otherwise, you can give them to a blacksmith to pound out and remake, and it's good tool steel. I know a lot of people who then will turn them into plane irons and things of that nature. Chisels, knives, they're great for that, if you have all the blacksmithing equipment.
John Jugler had asked, have you ever considered getting in contact with someone that does cleanouts to get your tools from?
Who does cleanouts?
I don't know.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm just reading the question.
Oh, you're probably talking about like junkers that clean it. I've never talked to them. No, it'd be interesting to see. Most of the time, the local, and every location's a little bit different, but around here, one of the best places are estate sales. When someone dies and passes on, and the family just cleans out the house and sells everything out in an estate sale. Those are very, very good around here. But every place is a little bit different. I know a lot of people have really good luck at flea markets. Around here, the flea markets are not very good for tools, but I've been told many other people who have really good luck in the area. So.
Let's see. Jackie McAllister says, was given several rasps and files recently, all rusty. What's the best way to clean them up? I think we talked about that.
Yep.
Jack Flash asked, do you keep your files in a file cabinet? Okay, I don't know if that was a joke. I just read it now. I'm like, okay, Jack.
That is a very good question. How do you store files? Like my rifflers, I have a tool roll that I store them in. I know a lot of people who will keep their files in a tool roll. It's very, very useful for that, especially when you have hundreds of rifflers. And I want to have them quick access, and so that's why I made this rack here, so they're all standing up with the handles out here. Anytime I can reach over and I can grab the handle, I can use it, and then I can put it away just like that. And all the handles are sticking out, so I can see all the files very easily. If you want to see that, I have a video on making it. I actually have a video where I go through each of my tool storages on the wall and how each of those are made. But there are a lot of people who make drawers. The one thing you want to make sure of is that your heads are not rubbing against each other. So you'll see a bunch of people will take the files and they'll put them all in a jar with the handle sticking up, and so all the files go, and it's like, oh! Because you have hardened steel. Handles on the ground. You have hardened steel against hardened steel, and all you're going to end up doing is dulling both of them. Iron sharpeneth iron, except for when they're files, you just end up dulling iron. Don't let them rub against each other. It is the fastest way to ruin them. These are actually file handles, and most of the time they have threading on the inside, so you shove them into place, and then you literally thread the handle on, and those threads will bite into the tang, because the tang is a softer steel than the head. And this particular one, I think I've worn out. I'm going to take it down a little bit. There we go. Now it's going to bite. There we go. And then you can get a handle that is much easier than for working with.
Well, you answered that question too, what to do if your handle pops off.
There are all different types of handles. Some of them are literally wood with a ferrule on there, and you pound it down into place. And these ones I bought on Amazon. I think I did. Yeah, I got these on Amazon. And they come in all different sizes, so they're actually talking about the diameter of the opening here. And you just jam them on and thread them down in, and you have a handle on there. But it's great because then I can switch them out. And over time, like when you buy them from the estate sale, very few of them come with any handles on them. So anytime I find extra handles, I'm always buying them and putting them on there because they don't. One of the old timer, do I have one here? No, I don't. The old timer method of getting a handle is actually go out after the corn, get a corn cob, and you can jam a corn cob on there. It works really well. I used to have a couple corn cob handles, but I think I finally got rid of them. They actually work really well. Oh, I didn't talk about rifflers. Oh, okay. So rifflers, what is the purpose of all of these amazing rifflers? Let me actually grab something to show this. Got a question while I'm doing this?
Sascha Leuthold had asked, would any metal file work just fine for wood?
Yes, yeah. Metal files work fine on wood. Just don't use wood rasps on metal projects. But yeah, you will have the purists out there say, don't use metal on wood. Don't listen to them. So let me show you this. So rifflers are really, really fun because I lost my controller again. They come in every shape and size, and it's over 200 of these that I have, and I've probably only used about 12 of them it's been about 3 years that I've owned them now. But what they are great for is when you're doing carving, and you'll do a lot of carving and you'll have all these ridges left from the gouges. Well, then you can come in here with a riffler and you can find that riffler shape that fits that spot. And you can come in here and you can work on that particular tiny little spot. And these curved surfaces will get down in here and do these small areas. And so you can start with a coarse surface, and I have these all organized by coarseness, and then I can come up finer and finer and finer until I get this really, really fine tooth. And I can come in here and do really detailed, fine work up in here and smooth out the surface in those tiny little spaces. And that's where rifflers really, really shine. So the question is, why would I use something like this rather than using a piece of sandpaper? The problem with using sandpaper is if you are sanding in here, you're going to be leaving little bits of sand and aggregate in there from the sandpaper. And that's usually not a problem as long as you don't ever take a chisel back to it. If you take a chisel back to it, there's a chance that one of those bits of aggregate are actually going to chip your carving chisel, because a carving chisel is a very, very detailed tooth to it. Whereas if you're using a riffler or a file, you're not leaving anything behind. You're leaving a really nice clean surface. And you can get into all these little details and smooth things out and get rid of any carving marks with rifflers. So that's where these really, really shine. But I often find myself pulling them out when I'm doing handles and other things like that. Do you need rifflers? No. When you have them, though, you're always finding an excuse to use them because they're just so interesting. I mean, when in the world am I ever going to use this one? I have no idea. But someday I'm going to be like, oh, I need that one. I don't know. Sorry, what's next? Rifflers are just a fun topic.
Are they really? Are you sure?
This is like woodworker porn right here.
So
don't tell my wife.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
Liar, pants and fact. Oh, Alan decided to join us.
Hey, Alan. Hey, how's it going?
So he says late fee and cocoa slush fun. Okay, hang on now. I gotta get my mom jokes out.
You missed it. So yeah.
Hush ups. It's time for a mom joke.
Oh, sorry. Hushing up.
Today at the bank, an old lady asked me to check her balance. So I pushed her over.
Hear about the old lady who came, it was her first time ever seeing a check. And she brought the check to the bank and went up to the teller and said, I've been told that if I give you this check, you'll give me money. And the bank teller said, yeah, that's how checks work. They're written out there and I know what fund to pull it from and I can give you the money. She says, really? Says, okay, well, here. This one's for $92. And so the teller takes the check and pulls out $92 and gives it to her. And she then pulls out the money and counts through it and looks up at him and counts through it again, looks up at him and counts through it again and looks up at him. And he says, is there something wrong? She says, no, it's, I think it's okay. He said, why? Is it all there? And she said, well, just barely.
Mine was better.
Long run, short slide, my favorite jokes. What were we talking about?
I don't know. My turn.
Riffler's questions.
Hang on. So John Jugler asked, what do you look for when you buy a file from a sale?
Honestly, I just look for a pile of them. I really don't look for them unless I'm looking for a particular shape or style. Like when I was first getting started, I was looking for a collection of shapes, and that's usually the biggest thing is you want that, for woodworking especially, you want that shape that's half round on one side, flat on the other, and then to have a coarse to a really fine. You get a collection of those and you can do 99% of your woodworking with those. And so that's the big thing I'm looking for, is what shapes and coarsenesses do I not have. And if I find a bucket for $10 and in there's one file I want, I'm going to buy the bucket because I want that one file. But then I end up with all these other ones, and eventually I'm like, oh yeah, I can use that one too.
Excuse me.
Like one I was particularly looking for a while was missing.
Oh, Gussie Duck!
Ow!
Alan wanted to know what color the Gussie Duck was. And you turned around. Blame Alan, not me.
Come to Wood by Wright Live.
Oh, don't you worry. They're giving me other ideas.
One I was looking for a long time is actually an auger file, and this is what is used to sharpen auger bits, and it's this shape. It has like an hourglass here, and then they come down to tip. It's safe on the face here, and has a file on the edge, and then on the other end it has a file on the face, and it's safe on the edge. And so this way you can get in and sharpen your little auger files. So I was looking for one of these for a long time. And I finally found a bucket. It had like 30 or 40 files in it, but there were one of these in there. And he wanted $20 for the whole thing. And I have not been able to find one of those for under 30 that's any quality. Well, until I found these now that you can actually still get. So I was like, oh great, I bought the whole bucket for it. And it had a whole pile of other files I really didn't care about, but now I end up using them. So yeah, no, I don't really look for anything particular other than a file that I don't have or a shape that I don't have. What's next?
Oh, let's see.
On that thought though, how do you know if a file is sharp or dull? One of the best ways to tell is feel there's a few teeth up by the handle here, and feel those teeth, because those teeth do not get used as much as the teeth right here, about 1/3 of the way back. That's where it gets used the most of the time. And so you'll feel these, and you'll feel like that's probably what sharp feels like, or close there too. So if you feel these, they're like completely rounded over and they're not biting your finger at all, and you come back here and they're biting your finger really nicely, that means that this one may not be worth buying because it's dull here in the middle. Until you've been using files for a while, it's very hard to know what sharp is, but that's probably one of the best ways right off the bat is feel the ones up by the handle. They're probably close to sharp, and that's what the rest of it should feel like, or they're somewhat close to that. Sorry, what's next? Oh wow, it's 9 o'clock already.
Yeah.
How many more questions we got?
Well, John Jugler. Well, now we got one more. Wants to know, have you thought about that apprenticeship?
If I had someone local and everything worked out, there's a possibility for that, but at my point in the business, there isn't really much way of paying someone for it, so I'm not right now. No, I don't know. Who knows what the...
Okay, hang on. That gets a mom joke.
Ah, yes, what is it? Come
Chill
on,
the jets for a second. Oh, wait, I think I said that one. Oh, hang on. Singing in the shower is all fun and games until you get shampoo in your mouth. Then it becomes a soap opera. I literally spend all week finding my jokes.
Cool. I think we'll wrap it up here. If I didn't get to your question, then we'll be doing another live next week. We possibly will be doing something interesting next week. I'm talking with another local person about possibly doing a beginner's course and bringing him in and doing a live where we'll talk about making a mallet or something similar like that. The idea of having someone in the shop and showing them building is a great idea. It sounds good, but the actual implementation in video is a little bit different. So next week might be a little interesting. If you have something you would like you'd like to see me showing someone as a beginner, first time with hand tools, let me know. That might be a fun idea. So, is there anything else I'm forgetting?
No, if we didn't get to your question, just send James a message.
Cool. I think that's about it. Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Okay, hang on.
I'm in a hold position.
You're not holding.
I'm holding.
Oh, you are holding. I was watching the other one.